In today's episode of the Platform Presents podcast, I'm with a very interesting guest here today. I'm with David Polstra. He is the marketing director at FusionAuth. And essentially what FusionAuth is doing, it delivers customer identity and access management. And that sort of, combines login technology, registration, SSO, and much more. And today we're going to be talking about what FusionAuth is actually doing, who they're serving, and how David is thinking about growth for the company. So welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Lucas. This is really exciting to be on the show.
Awesome. So give us that 360 overview. What is FusionAuth all about?
Yeah, so you mentioned customer identity and access management. Basically, anyone can build their own registration and login. But when you start adding things like social sign-on, multi-factor authentication, and you require compliance like HIPAA, GDPR, that's when it gets really tricky. Then you add tens of thousands to millions of users on that. On top of that, you can imagine how difficult and how long it would take a company to build an authentication service. So that's where FusionAuth comes in, where it typically take a development team somewhere months to years. We give you a production-ready authentication service in a few weeks. And you can get back to building what you want to build and what actually makes your company money.
Yep, makes a whole lot of sense. Like, what types of companies would be using this? Is there typically cases where there is already sort of that large scale of users and they sort of, it's an afterthought, or like what's the typical scenario?
Yeah. So most of our customers come to us because they've already built an authentication service and they don't want to manage it anymore.
Yep.
Or they're using open source tool or a different provider, and they're ready to move off onto something like FusionAuth. So that's where we come in.
Gotcha, makes sense. And if you would characterize the companies, is that what types of companies, what industries, and maybe even what type of individuals would be raising their hand and says, hey, we need something like FusionAuth? It sounds like a CTO kind of decision, but maybe give us an insight.
It comes down to the CTO at the end of the day. But really any company that needs login and they have end users. So we're talking to small to medium-sized businesses all the way up to enterprise. And usually it's the developer that finds us first, and then they raise it to their CTO or technical decision maker. And that's where the buying process starts.
Very cool. You mentioned the buying process. Maybe let's talk a little bit about the journey of people getting to know and getting started with a FusionAuth. What would be sort of the typical client acquisition channels that you guys would be leveraging?
Yeah, so right now we're focused on organic search, word of mouth, and advertising. We get a lot of inbound into our website. So we're really focused on creating great content that developers can find. Once they get excited about something, that's when they start talking about it. And that's they're asking questions to their friends. What tools are you using? So that we're really trying to plug ourselves into that, get in front of them so that they can find FusionAuth a lot easier.
Gotcha. Typically, when we have people on the show that are driven by inbound marketing, the website quite obviously plays a very critical role. How do you think about sort of the strengths versus maybe the room for improvement of the current website?
Yeah, it's always evolving. This technology space is always evolving, so we always have to keep up with that. I'm actually going through a new website revamp. So we're really focusing on the industry, what the industry is talking about, things like single sign-on, multi-factor authentication, threat detection. These are things that developers and decision makers are searching for because they need those solutions. And we're really trying to make sure that we're talking the talk, so to say, and making sure that we're building that trust so that when it is time to make that decision, FusionAuth is the first company that they're thinking about.
Gotcha. Makes a lot of sense. So what are sort of the key things? You mentioned content. Anything else that you discovered when thinking about that revamp that you want to address moving forward?
Yeah, so I mean, design comes into play with that. The other thing is developers are very direct. They don't like the marketing pitch. So you have to be smart. You have to tell them how we're going to solve their problem. And you have to do it in a way that's, they're a little quirky. So you have to have a little fun with it. So those are a few other things that we're thinking about when designing this website.
Very cool. Okay, very good. Maybe let's, if that's okay for you, we dive a little bit more into the topic, and then we heading over, because I think it's quite interesting. You mentioned the target persona of the developer. Like, how do you typically try to figure out why people don't convert? Like, what is sort of your go-to strategies to figure out why people come to the page and don't convert?
That is a good question. I mean, that's like the marketing dilemma, right? Like, why are people not converting? I think like when we lose a customer, it's because they've gone to a different solution and they realize that maybe we didn't meet every single one of their needs. Another thing that we find is like they have something that's already built and it's good enough for them now, and they come back. So like I mentioned that the product is always evolving, and when we're building new features, that's when we're getting those people back into the pipeline. So it's really important to like not focus too much on the individual needs, especially with a product like FusionAuth, but really think about the community as a whole. And eventually we'll get to that point where we are addressing your individual needs.
Yeah, makes a whole lot of sense. Let's switch gears a little bit. I would love to talk about your personal journey and marketing.
Sure.
You've been at some, interesting companies. You've had some various different inbound marketing and marketer roles. What I would be curious is, right, there's so much content out there on every day. You could read probably the whole day just articles on growth marketing that just were launched that day. How do you filter? Like, what is sort of your way to decide, okay, this is content that I'm taking on board versus the rest, I have to filter out?
In terms of marketing content?
Exactly. Like, what's your go-to places? Where do you read? Where do you learn?
So I kind of do like my learning method is trial by fire. So I know what I need by talking to other marketers. I get a lot of my like high level, like what are the technologies you're using, what are the strategy you're using, just by talking to other marketers. And then it's up to me to figure out how I'm going to do those things. So for example, like Google advertising, it's its own beast, right? So how am I going to figure out what is going to work for me? I like to try a few different techniques, try those for a few months and figure out what's working. I usually go to like YouTube or different blog sites. Neil Patel, I'm sure a lot of marketers know his content. Just like looking for those tutorials and figuring out what works for other folks and how can I emulate that with developers.
Makes sense. Since we're slowly coming to an end of the interview, I'd love to jump into our rapid fire questions. Are you ready for those?
Yeah, sure. Let's go.
What's the last book you read?
Ooh, I can't remember the name. It was about the Vietnam War and a translator that migrated to the United States, and seeing his path. And he was a secret agent and he was a communist and also working for the United States. So it was a really interesting book. I wish I knew the title of it.
Very cool. We can put it into the text notes after.
Sure. Sounds great.
What is one single thing that your company is focused on the most at the moment?
The website, getting that out the door and all the content that goes with it. So there's a lot of supporting content with each one of these pages. I'm working with our developer relations person on building that. and also the designer on top of that. So I'm wearing a lot of hats, but the main focus right now is getting that website out the door.
Very cool. If there would be no boundaries in tech, what's the one thing you would fix for your role today?
Oh, that's a good one. I think like with developers, they don't like being tracked. And it's really hard. We're using a cookieless analytics platform. It's really hard to know what our users are doing. So if I could choose anything, it would be figuring out what our users are doing without invading their privacy.
What's the last thing that kept you awake at night at the company? Or about the company, not at the company, about the company.
We're growing tremendously, and trying to keep up with that, being a one-man marketing team, I mean, that keeps you up at night by itself. So it's a fun journey. It's really cool to see the growth and see the results from my contributions. So yeah, I'm really enjoying the ride.
Very cool. And last question would be, if today would be your first day at FusionAuth, right? You're just joining, stepping into the office the first day, or when you joined, maybe there was remote work already. What's the one advice you would give yourself?
Yeah, I think it would be not everyone's going to like your work, and that's okay. For example, we had someone from a competitor come up to us and say, "Your ads are cringeworthy." I thought that was funny because we're not advertising to that person. The thing that matters is the results that we're seeing. Higher than average and click-through rate, really good conversion on our website, people buying from our website. Of course, our competitor is going to say that they don't like our ads, but that's okay.
And they spoke about it. They spoke about it. I mean, that's already the first part done, I would say.
Yeah, I'm not going to appease everyone, and that's totally okay.
Very cool. David, I really appreciate you took the time with us today and be a guest on Pathfund Presents. I want to give you the very last word. If somebody would be forgetting all that we discussed about the company today, and what should they remember about FusionAuth?
Sure. We're here for the developer community. Our CEO and co-founder both have developer backgrounds. They've built Auth before, and they know how much it sucks. So that's why we built FusionAuth. So while it's fun to make money, at the end of the day, it's really up to making developers' lives easier so that they can get back to building what's awesome.
Thanks a lot for being a guest on Pathfund Presents.
Yeah, thanks, Lucas.